Most people believe wealth begins with a high salary or a lucky investment, but the truth is that it starts with a system that works even when motivation fades. Investing just $10 a day may seem trivial, yet when combined with consistency and time, it quietly compounds into life-changing results. The reason many never reach their first $100,000 is not because of the market, returns, or intelligence. It is because they fail to build disciplined, repeatable habits. Small daily decisions, repeated without fail, create far greater outcomes than dramatic, high-risk moves that often end in regret. This approach is not about getting rich quickly, timing the market, or chasing perfect investments. It is about understanding that simple, consistent behavior, applied over years, is what ultimately separates successful investors from those who give up too early. When people hear the idea of building $100,000 with just $10 a day, most of them immediately focus on the number itself. They start calculating, doubting, or dismissing it outright. That reaction is exactly why this concept matters. The $10 a day is not presented as a magic formula or a literal promise. It is an entry point. It is small enough to feel manageable, yet meaningful enough to force a shift in behavior. The real premise is not the amount, it is the system behind it. Wealth, at the early stage, is not built by income level, intelligence, or luck. It is built by consistent action repeated long enough for mathematics to take over. $10 a day simply removes the excuse that you need to be rich to start. Consistency matters more than income at the beginning because income is often unstable, emotional, and tied to circumstances you cannot fully control. Behavior, on the other hand, can be designed. A person earning $40,000 a year who invests consistently will outperform someone earning twice as much who invests sporadically or emotionally. This is not theory. It shows up again and again in long-term data. The goal of the daily amount is to anchor the behavior. Once that behavior exists, the amount can change. Without the behavior, no amount will save you. To understand why small daily actions matter, you have to understand compounding in time, not as abstract concepts, but as forces. Compounding is often explained with charts and percentages, but its real power lies in duration. When you invest small amounts consistently, the early years look unimpressive. Growth feels slow. Progress feels invisible. That is where most people quit. What they miss is that compounding is backloaded. The majority of gains come later after the base has had time to build. $10 a day is about $3,600 a year. On its own, that does not feel life-changing, but when those contributions are invested over 10, 15, or 20 years at reasonable returns, the curve bends. Not suddenly, but decisively. It is important to be precise here. Reasonable returns do not mean extraordinary performance. They mean long-term market-level returns, achieved through diversified investing over time. At those levels, the math works, but it works slowly. This is where expectations matter. Building $100,000 with small daily investments is not a short-term outcome. It is a medium to long-term result. Anyone expecting it to happen in 2 or 3 years is misunderstanding the process. The timeline is part of the discipline. Time is not the obstacle. Time is the requirement. This brings us to a more subtle but critical shift, moving from the idea of saving money to the idea of deploying capital. Saving feels safe. It feels responsible. But money that sits idle is losing value over time due to inflation. Deploying capital means putting money to work with intention. Consider two people with identical incomes, expenses, and opportunities. One saves whatever is left over at the end of the month and keeps it in cash. The other automatically invests a fixed amount every day, regardless of mood or market headlines. Over a decade, the difference between these two behaviors is not just financial, it is psychological. One person is reactive, the other proactive. One is preserving, the other is compounding. The opportunity cost here is enormous, even though it is invisible in the short term. The saver feels secure because the balance does not fluctuate. The investor experiences volatility but gains ownership in productive assets. Over time, the saver's purchasing power erodes quietly, while the investor's capital participates in growth. This is not about risk tolerance. It is about understanding what risk actually is. Avoiding volatility feels safe, but avoiding growth is the real danger. Once this mindset is clear, the first foundational step becomes obvious. The investing habit must be non-negotiable, not when it feels convenient. not when the market looks calm. Every day, or at least on a predefined schedule that approximates daily consistency. Automation is critical here because willpower is unreliable. If you have to decide each day whether to invest, you eventually will not. Automation removes the decision entirely. The money moves before you have time to interfere. Budgeting alignment matters just as much. The daily amount should come from a category that does not create stress or resentment. If investing feels like punishment, it will not last. The system should be designed so that investing happens alongside normal life, not in opposition to it. Removing friction means choosing simple platforms, limiting the number of accounts, and avoiding unnecessary complexity. Complexity gives the brain excuses to delay. Simplicity keeps the process alive. At this early stage, the most dangerous mistakes are behavioral, not technical. Waiting for the perfect time is one of them. People convince themselves they will start once the market drops, once the economy stabilizes, or once they feel more confident. In reality, that moment rarely arrives. Overanalyzing investments is another common trap. Beginners spend months comparing options instead of executing a simple plan. The irony is that early precision matters far less than early participation. A basic diversified approach implemented consistently beats a perfect plan that never starts. Stopping after small market drops is another pattern that destroys long-term outcomes. When the first downturn arrives, it feels personal. The account balance goes down and doubt takes over. This is where systems prove their value. If contributions are automated and expectations are realistic, downturns become part of the process rather than a signal to exit. Quitting early does not fail because of bad markets. It fails because the behavior was never fully committed. By this point, the underlying message should be clear. The $100,000 goal does not begin with stock selection, advanced strategies, or financial sophistication. It begins with behavior design. It begins with systems that operate regardless of emotion. The daily amount is a tool, not the strategy. The strategy is consistency applied over time. Once that foundation is in place, the focus can shift from starting to executing properly. That transition is where most of the practical work begins. Once the daily investing habit exists and runs without constant effort, the focus naturally shifts from starting to executing correctly. This is where many people either complicate the process or undermine it with unnecessary risk. For small, consistent amounts, the investment vehicles must be simple, scalable, and forgiving of mistakes. Low-cost index funds and exchange-traded funds fit this role because they allow broad exposure without requiring constant decisions. They are designed to work with regular contributions and long-time horizons. Speculative picks, individual stocks, or high-risk assets may look attractive, but they introduce volatility that is harder to tolerate emotionally when investing small amounts daily. The reason simplicity matters here is not because complex strategies never work, but because complexity increases the chances of behavioral failure. When investments are easy to understand and easy to maintain, consistency improves. Index-based investing allows the investor to participate in overall market growth without needing to predict winners. The daily contribution blends into the background while ownership quietly accumulates. Over time, this structure compounds not just money, but discipline. Risk management at this stage must be approached differently than most people expect. Beginners often define risk as short-term losses or market declines. In reality, risk is the permanent loss of capital or the failure to reach long-term goals. Volatility is uncomfortable, but it is not the same as risk when the time horizon is long. When investments are diversified across many assets and industries, individual failures matter less. Time absorbs volatility, provided the investor does not exit prematurely. Alignment between time horizon and asset choice is essential. Money that is needed in the short term should not be exposed to market fluctuations. Money invested for long-term goals can tolerate them. Daily investing works precisely because it assumes patience. It accepts that markets will fluctuate and that contributions made during downturns are not mistakes but opportunities. This perspective transforms volatility from a threat into a feature of the system. To see how execution affects outcomes, consider two investors with identical incomes and identical long-term goals. One invests a small amount every day, regardless of market conditions. The other waits, saves cash, and invests lump sums sporadically when confidence is high. On paper, both may invest similar total amounts over time. In practice, their experiences diverge. The daily investor experiences less stress because decisions are automated and spread over time. Market timing errors are minimized because entry points are averaged naturally. The sporadic investor, however, carries constant psychological weight. Every decision feels significant. When markets rise, they feel regret for not investing earlier. When markets fall, they hesitate, waiting for clarity that never arrives. Lump sum investing magnifies emotional swings and increases the temptation to interfere. Over the long term, this behavior often leads to lower returns, not because the strategy is flawed, but because execution is inconsistent. Once the system is running smoothly, optimization becomes the next logical step. Optimization does not mean abandoning the original discipline, it means building on it. Increasing the daily amount over time as income grows is a natural progression. Reinvesting returns ensures that gains compound rather than stagnate. Aligning investments with income growth allows the system to scale without losing its behavioral foundation. The original daily amount remains the baseline, the minimum standard that never disappears. This approach prevents lifestyle inflation from consuming progress. As income increases, it becomes easy to justify higher spending while leaving investments unchanged. Maintaining the daily habit ensures that wealth building grows alongside lifestyle, not behind it. Optimization should feel incremental, not dramatic. Large changes introduce risk. Small adjustments preserve stability. Despite having the right system and assets, many people still fail to reach long-term goals. The reason is rarely technical. It is psychological. Impatience is the most common barrier. Compounding is slow at first, and progress can feel discouraging. Boredom follows. The process lacks excitement once novelty fades. Comparison adds pressure. Seeing others claim faster results or higher returns creates doubt, even when those claims lack context or sustainability. These mental traps cause people to abandon strategies that statistically work. They chase new approaches, reset progress, and repeat the cycle. The discipline required here is not about doing more. It is about doing less, but doing it consistently. The hardest part of investing is not choosing what to buy. It is choosing what to ignore. By the end of this phase, execution and mindset converge. The systems are in place. The assets are appropriate. The plan is realistic. What remains is endurance. Staying invested long enough for compounding to do its work requires trust in the process and restraint in moments of doubt. At this point, progress is no longer about effort. It is about patience. At this stage, the focus moves away from mechanics and toward longevity. The difference between people who eventually reach meaningful financial milestones and those who fall short is not intelligence or access to information. It is the ability to maintain consistency across changing circumstances. Life does not remain stable for 10 or 15 years. Careers shift. Income rises and falls. Expenses change. Markets move through cycles of optimism and fear. The investor who succeeds is the one who treats the system as permanent, even when everything else is temporary. Consistency through change is what allows compounding to reach its full potential. This long-term perspective reframes setbacks. A year of lower contributions due to income disruption does not invalidate the process. A market downturn does not signal failure. These are expected phases. The daily habit exists to absorb these shocks, not to eliminate them. When investing is treated as part of life rather than a separate project, it survives transitions that would otherwise cause abandonment. This is where most people quit, not because the plan stopped working, but because life became inconvenient. As time passes, the role of oversight becomes important, but it must be restrained. Periodic review is necessary to ensure alignment with goals, risk tolerance, and income. Constant adjustment is not. Reviewing investments annually or semi-annually allows for rebalancing when allocations drift too far from the original intent. It provides an opportunity to increase contributions when income grows or expenses decline. It also creates a structured moment to decide when no action is required. Knowing when to avoid changes is just as important as knowing when to make them. Markets will always provide reasons to act. News cycles thrive on urgency. Frequent adjustments often reflect emotion rather than insight. A disciplined review process acts as a filter. It limits interference and protects the system from impulsive decisions. The goal is not to optimize constantly, but to remain aligned over time. To understand how this plays out in reality, consider an ordinary investor with an average income and no special advantages. They begin with a small daily contribution and maintain it through different stages of life. Early years show modest growth. Progress feels slow, even discouraging at times. Around the 10-year mark, something changes. the account balance begins to grow faster, not because contributions suddenly increase dramatically, but because the accumulated base has reached a size where returns become meaningful. This is the point where compounding becomes visible. The $100,000 milestone often arrives not as a result of a single breakthrough, but as the outcome of years of unremarkable consistency. The acceleration surprises those who remain patient. It never appears for those who quit early. This is why the middle years matter most. They are the least exciting and the most important. Throughout this process, simplicity remains the defining feature. The strategy does not evolve into something complex. It does not require constant innovation. Simplicity reduces decision fatigue. It limits emotional mistakes. It prevents behavioral drift that occurs when strategies become too flexible. A simple plan is easier to follow during stressful periods. It survives boredom. It withstands doubt. Complexity often masquerades as sophistication, but in practice, it creates fragility. The more moving parts a system has, the more ways it can fail. A simple, repeatable process allows the investor to focus energy on income growth, career development, and life decisions that indirectly strengthen financial outcomes. The investment system runs quietly in the background, doing exactly what it is designed to do. Reaching $100,000 is not the end goal. It is a threshold. It represents confidence in one's ability to build wealth intentionally. It creates optionality. It provides flexibility in decision-making. It becomes the foundation for more advanced strategies, such as passive income generation or long-term financial independence. Without this foundation, those larger goals remain theoretical. The broader outcome is psychological as much as financial. Consistent daily action builds trust in the process and in oneself. It replaces anxiety with structure. It transforms money from a source of stress into a tool. This shift affects decisions far beyond investing. It changes how risk is perceived, how opportunities are evaluated, and how time is valued. When all of this is distilled into its essentials, the framework is straightforward. Establish a small, non-negotiable daily investing habit. Use simple, diversified assets designed for long-term participation. Manage risk through time and consistency rather than prediction. Optimize gradually as income and experience grow. Maintain discipline through boredom, volatility, and comparison. These steps are not complicated. They are effective because they are repeatable. Significant financial milestones do not require exceptional tactics. They require ordinary actions applied consistently over long periods. $10 a day is not the reason the strategy works. Discipline is. Patience is. Time is. When these elements are respected, the outcome becomes not just possible, but probable. By now, it should be clear that building significant wealth is rarely about shortcuts or luck. It is about disciplined systems, consistent action, and patience over time. The strategies discussed here are simple, but they work because they focus on behavior, not speculation. If you found this breakdown useful, take a moment to reflect on your own habits. What small, daily action could you start today that your future self will thank you for? Share your thoughts or experiences in the comments below, and let's discuss how small, consistent steps can lead to real financial freedom.